Good evening. Welcome to the world tonight. I'm Peter. I'm joined with my co-host Adam. He's back after his 1 week sabbatical. I hope he's
Yay! I imagine you all missed me, especially Peter.
Of course, it just it's a mist the shadow that Mr. Head there, the flat which StreamYard gives to people when they don't have their cameras on. But anyway, speaking of relevant topics, and it's also the 12th of February, 2021. Can't forget our new intro. We have a very busy show, and the first topic, we've mentioned this and now it feels like an eternity. That is the Italian government formation. Yes, Mario Draghi, or nicknamed Super Mario, is now designated as of tomorrow to become the next prime minister of Italy. Yes, Italy has had now its 67th government fall since the end of the Second World War. Healthy democracy in action. But he forms a technocratic government with the support of most of the parties in the Chamber of Deputies. He has the Five Star Movement, Lega, Forza Italia, the Democratic Party, Italia Viva, and Free and Equal. And if you're interested in knowing this, he has a left wing, which is the Free and Equal, all the way to the right wing, which is the Lega. So it tells you the fun technocratic government Italy will be running with. In terms of ministries, equally divided among the parties, with the traditional independents taking their way. Of course, Mr. Draghi's main focus is to recover Italy from the pandemic. He, of course, led the ECB through the Eurozone crisis and led it extremely well. Of course, this will be a very interesting coalition in terms of how it lasts and also the different personalities at play. Since we have populists, conservatives, the left, Social Democrats, all under one tent. So government bills are going to be fun to see what ideologically happens. And in terms of the main parties, Mr. Salvini, who currently leads the polls, has been talking like a Europhile all week, one of the more interesting developments coming out of Italy. Adam, any thoughts on this whole little drama that is Italian politics, governmental formations?
Yeah, so this, as you alluded to right there, besides the absolute insanity of the political ideologies represented here, it's been very interesting to look towards the dynamics on the right of Italian politics. So now, prior to this, when you had the centre-left government of the Democratic Party, Five Star Movement, and some smaller ones, the dynamic was for representing the right was between Lega and then it was also between the Brothers of Italy, which are led by Giorgia Meloni. Now, in this very interesting situation where, as Pete said, Salvini has sort of aligned himself as being Europhilic, not really. Like it's very hard to position himself and how he's playing this. I guess you could say he's being pragmatic in terms of trying to align himself politically with the other parties that are represented in his coalition, which will also be pro-EU. They've been basically trying to play it where, because the Prime Minister has such a significant role in the EU, that Italy is going to be able to elevate its position because they have such a strong representative. But yeah, who knows how that will be seen. I mean, one of the funniest things was him saying that maybe his MEPs should look towards aligning with the Europhilic European People's Party rather than the Identity and Democracy Party, which he is currently, or his party is currently a member of. But yeah, just back to that dynamic. So because of his shift towards working with this government, Giorgia Meloni, as I said, leader of the Brothers of Italy, who are a possibly, even more right-wing in some instances than Lega itself. They have a very interesting history. I say interesting in the sense that they are basically the successors to what was a neo-fascist party. Obviously, they're not neo-fascist now, but they're still very right-wing. Yeah, exactly. So what has happened now is that she's been able to, or she will be able to, present herself as being firmly the person representing the populist right, who's rejecting this technocratic government. So yeah. This will be a interesting dynamic to see how the Brothers of Italy play off of this. They're doing incredibly well in polling at the moment, and who knows, this could be something that takes them even further, possibly into first place as in polling, which is currently being held by Lega. But I think another interesting angle to look at this from is really that this is not only a technocratic government, but it's also quite a political government in the sense that it has representatives in some major sections of the ministries represented there. So, for example, you will have in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you've got the Five Star Movement, Ministry of Defence, you've got the Democratic Party, Ministry of Economic Development, you've got Lega, etc., etc. But some of the really important ones, such as Interior, Justice, you've also got Economy and Finance, that kind of thing, are held by technocrats. So, will be interesting to see maybe, if these political roles clash a lot with the technocrats and how they really settle into those roles. So, yep, as a whole, will be interesting to see if this is something that can sustain itself, because, as you said, the political ideology is all over the place. And yeah, I mean, just as a final point, the ideology could get even more insane, because there is definitely the possibility that minor parties, such as the Italian left or Green Italia, that kind of thing, join along and get some sub-secretaries. And they would be supporting the government in that capacity. So we could have a government which is represented by, or has representation from every single European parliament affiliation, all the way from the left, all the way to Identity and Democracy. So, yep, it is insane.
And the other thing about the Brotherhood Party is they will pretty much become the opposition. They're part of the center-right coalition, but for them, this is a very big, almost make-or-break moment. If they play their cards right, they very much could be their own force to be reckoned with, and not being in a technocratic government, depending if there are unpopular decisions that come from that technocratic government, could very much play a role in their success. So Brothers of Italy could go from the third or second player in the center-right coalition to the leader, basically, of potentially making an Italian center-right or right-wing government in 2 years' time, or whenever the next election is.
Yep, I entirely agree with that. It definitely looks like a very sorry state for the centre-left and populist parties. When you look at the state of the Five Star Movement, they are in tatters compared to their previous election, primarily because a lot of the things they said they do haven't done. And then also the Democratic Party they've seen some gain in support, but really it's just been around the same levels that they got on the last election. So definitely not something that they've been able to gain from there. But who knows? It will be interesting that if this government does succeed, who gets the credit for it? And who actually, because, with so many parties, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to really claim any credit. So it will be fascinating to see who does get any kind of success from any of the government's work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other key interesting element will be numerous players at hand. Those who get it will have enjoyed how these ministries work together, since there's going to be technocrats, ambitious politicians. Always fun to imagine the fun games that will be done in government. But anyway, that's Italy. We've beat that to death. Draghiani is a very talented technocrat, and he will have a fun challenge ahead. But moving on, we now move to Ecuador, and Adam can explain the fun presidential election that occurred this week that was on no one's radar because the media tends to not cover these things anymore.
Yeah, so Ecuador went to the polls on Sunday for a presidential and legislative election, which was set amidst widespread discontent over the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic, and with a failing government response comes in also economic insecurity in the crisis. So that has also been a major pressing issue. Furthermore, corruption scandals have plagued the government of President Moreno, who didn't seek re-election in this presidential one. So already seeing something quite interesting there. So just from the outset, going into this election, we obviously had a country which was quite unstable, and polls gave a clear impression that there was a desire for change. So polls painted the picture that the battle would be a two-way fight between Guillermo Lasso and Andres Arauz. Arauz is a socialist economist and former head of the central bank who leads the Socialist Citizen Revolution movement. Lasso leads the Conservative Creating Opportunities Party, who is more free market focused. So, yep, that's the sort of idea the polls presented, but that wasn't the case in the results. So the polls showed that Arauz would really steal ahead with it, getting around 30% or so, and that's what he really received. He received 32.44% of the vote, or thereabout. I don't think the actual count has finished entirely yet. So he will advance to the second round. But with 98.9% of the vote counted, Lasso beat the indigenous anti-capitalist Perez, who got 0.2% less than him. So it was quite exciting to watch if you were following the results at all. It showed that Perez was slightly inching above Lasso, in which would be a second round where you have two left-wing candidates, which, something exciting there, and who could really play off there. But it seems like, as of now, Lasso will be the one heading into the second round. So this will be an interesting second round, primarily because it looks like Lasso will get entirely dominated. Polls show that the socialist candidate will do far, far better. He is far more popular, and just simply this desire to end austerity, which recent economic measures have been imposed, there's a real desire to remove them. So, yeah, that's the overall outlook of it. The actual legislative elections painted a very, very similar picture, where you see socialist parties presenting a clear majority over parties that's, sort of liberal parties, conservative parties, that kind of thing. So this is following quite an interesting trend we're seeing across South America, where socialist parties are doing very, very well for themselves. Primarily, we saw recently in Bolivia, but there are other examples where the actual left in Latin America really been storming ahead. So yeah, I think the final thing to lead on, or just say about this, is that with Perez, he has been claiming that, obviously the results being very close, he's been claiming that there has been electoral fraud. So saying that the votes were trying to be taken from him, that kind of thing. The belief, or at least from what I read, the belief from his candidate was that he knew that Lasso would be defeated, and so the sort of ruling class wanted to ensure that another left-wing candidate didn't get in, so there would be there'd be a very clear successor, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the overall outlook. Peter, do you have any thoughts on Ecuador's presidential election?
So yeah, I mean, it was an interesting, as you mentioned, nail-biting at the contest between the two back runners, between Lasso and Perez. Obviously, Arnaz is clearly was on the verge of winning outright, and it looks like he will have to go to the second round, is a clear favorite in that regard to win in the second round. And this is, of course, interesting in the fact that the outgoing president was, elected, was basically the successor, a more moderate successor to the previous controversial Ecuadorian president, Rafael Correa, but then zoomed to a different realm of, instead of following on Mr. Correa's thing, to move to more hawkish fiscal policy, which clearly didn't resonate with the voters, and it cost him. Obviously, he was unpopular, didn't seek it, and just was quite, out of, the advantages he had. But it's quite an interesting result in terms of what's going to happen. And I think your point about the left rise in Latin America, I think, is another interesting point. I mean, we saw in the 2000s that rise of the left in Latin America, which had a drastic, change in the continent's way of doing things, but then that was swept out by what it looked like the return of the right in the 2010s, which is interesting to say the least of where the continent is heading. I mean, Ecuador's nearby neighbor, Colombia, has had never have had a center-left government in ages. Current polling says they may very well have a center-left government due to the unpopularity of the current government. So it's an interesting tide we've seen across Latin America, Argentina as well, of more leftish candidates beginning to do electorally successful again at the ballot box, which is an interesting phenomenon to see in Latin America, the return of the left.
Yep, it definitely seems to have died, but it is coming back. And to be honest, this time I doubt there will be any CIA involvement. But you never know.
To be fair, the 2000s had no CIA involvement unless you're a believer of the Venezuelan states. News beliefs.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah. Well, we never know. Ultimately, it does seem that
no Augusto Pinochet's 2.0.
Yeah, exactly. No, it looks like is this a trend that will continue to succeed? Do these socialist measures that a lot of these if these Latin American countries do get these left-wing governments that haven't had it before, is it something that succeeds in the future? So yeah, definitely will be something to watch. And also, I think, just as a final note, how having a sort of, or not left-wing bloc, but just having a selection of left-wing countries close together, how that actually operates for the United States. I'm sure that maybe there will be some kind of trade disputes. I'm just spitballing here, but there will definitely be some possible interesting conflicts that arise between the South American countries that have socialist governance and the United States. So that will
the other interesting point, I think, is the ones who still have center-right governments. How do they handle each other? I mean, since historically the center-right and the center-left in Latin America have had so much of a delve of how they deal with each other. How does that relationship also work as well?
Yes. Does Bolsonaro build a giant wall around the entirety of Brazil's borders to keep them out?
Or does Bolsonaro get even closer with America, even under Biden? Does he continue with that warmth? Another interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we'll try and keep an eye out on all these elections, because I believe there are some more coming up in 2021. So yeah, definitely.
Indeed. Moving on to the lovely organization that is the WHO, World Health Organization. World Health Organization observers/scientists were in Wuhan this week to investigate the origins of the coronavirus. Of course, being this in China, not a lot was said, of course. I'm sure there was some suggested material on what to say from the host nation. But they've investigated the market where it is believed this virus has come out. Obviously, the People's Republic of China has maintained their current line that this was not created in China, and that this was either an accident or it was foreign interference who brought it into China. Again, it's the Chinese government, so take their words with as much fallacy as you'd like to take normal things out of the People's Republic of China. But the scientists went to Wuhan market. They were guided through by the Chinese about what happened, where this. Of course, the WHO hasn't really said much about this. It's obviously in the beginning of stages. Of course, there's been criticism from many Western governments about China's denial about its role in the creation of or spreading of the pandemic, and lying to the world in that regard. Of course, this is again set off controversies with other Asian governments who still think China is not telling the truth, and the previous administration in the U.S. who basically accused China of making this in a lab for a good chunk of the time. Certain elements of the previous government, to be fair. So it's an interesting story. Obviously, this is the beginning of the investigation of this. Whether people believe it or not remains to be another story, and whether the WHO believes any single thing China tells them. Any thoughts, Adam?
I mean, what more is there to say? There's definitely going to have to be a period of reflection for a lot of the world to really reassess the value or the relationship that they have with China. Obviously, their handling or mishandling of the coronavirus pandemic and the ability for it to spread out in the world had a pretty significant play into its spreading initially. So yeah, that's already giving some countries apprehension about working with China. Then you've also got the significant impact of the Uyghur genocide going on in China at the moment, and the acknowledgement of it, or lack of, from some.
Banning the BBC from reporting on it, as they
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for everyone's criticism of the BBC at home, the work they've been doing in China on reporting on these, well, I guess concentration camps. Yeah, concentration camp, I think, is the simplest word to use for it. is incredibly important work, and for China to close off entirely, yeah, countries definitely going to have to rethink their relationship. Although, to be honest, it doesn't seem like they are. You look towards what the EU's recent trade agreement with China. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like anything is going to change. But one can hope. But
And an interesting thing will be what the new Biden administration takes on China, since they haven't really revealed yet what their policy is towards China, or what they can plan to do continuing with the previous administration or changing from the previous administration.
Yeah, from what we can already tell, there's a sort of more focus towards trying to bring industry to America, or at least industry that is centered in China to America. And then also this, I mean, to be honest, both parties are quite hawkish on China anyway. So,
oh yeah, that has changed drastically.
Oh, 100%. I think that's one of the, of the many bipartisan foreign affairs views that Washington has. I think definitely China, or being hawkish on China, is definitely one of those. But yeah, I think that's everything from me.
Yeah, I mean, just to quote on the hawkishness of China, I mean, it's really fascinating to think almost 6 years ago, the whole strategy with China was we need to be friends. And most of Washington thought, we can do business with, the Chinese government. Say what you want, but the Trump era has changed that. What was the Trump era drastically changed that mindset. We've now seen a belief in the U.S. that China is a mortal threat. We've seen the U.S. military literally say out loud, we have to prepare for scenarios of war against China. I mean, that was unimaginable 10 years ago. The U.S. military admitting, yes, we may have a war with China in the near future, and it would be very much a heavy casualty war. I mean, the U.S. military doesn't say things like that unless there's a swing of the pendulum in the thinking of this. I mean, the U.S. is now has the same number of fleet deployments and troop numbers as they did in World War II against Japan. Mostly against China. It's just fascinating to see the shift that has happened with China in the military sense and economically as well. The big push in the U.S. to hit the Chinese in their wall, the Chinese to bring back jobs to the U.S. This big change of, cooperation with China, the belief that China was on the path to the rightness, to now seeing China as a mortal threat that has to be defeated.
Yep, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of righteousness, in China's other favorite Asian country, so I have to connect these two, in Japan, the Japanese, who are still insistent they will have the Olympics, all signs say that the Olympics is still scheduled to kick off in July. The Olympics minister, however, of Japan, Olympics chief, I should say, unfortunately found himself probably not going to be involved in any more of that, as he made some lovely sexist comments, allegedly. You could argue sexist, probably are, trying to be fair and balanced, but sexist comments, saying how women, talk too much, which of course, even in Japan, had bipartisan outrage, which ended up with this chief having to resign his very prestigious position. Adam, thoughts on this lovely affair?
Yeah, so his resignation follows what we've covered on the show before, which has been significant rumors of the Olympics in Tokyo possibly being cancelled, and really just the general apathy that the Games holds from the Japanese political class. However, I think the real interesting thing, besides the international backlash that there has been against these derogatory and sexist comments, has been the drama surrounding the ability to appoint a new, chief to the committee. So his successor was expected, or at least rumored to be, the former chairman of the Japan Football Association and head of the Tokyo Athletes Village. So this is Saburo Kawabuchi. However, he has to withdrawn his candidacy because of the way in which Mori approached him, which has lacked oversight. So from what I can tell, it essentially seemed to be some very informal conversations in which he basically said he could be his successor. Now, this didn't work for the Japanese government because they wanted someone younger, or they wanted a woman to really represent, a change in Japanese outlook towards, a younger generation, or to actually promote women who were really hurt in this controversy. So yeah, that was his own internalized drama, where you had the government clashing with this person. So what has to happen now is basically the actual committee itself has said that they need to put forward a very transparent process, and they will do so. Probably without Karabuchi actually as a candidate. So it will be interesting to see who gets the role. I expect it probably will be somebody younger and possibly a woman into the role, because it's really what the Japanese government is going to be leading on. And as I said, remember, the Olympics are already in a precarious state. 80% of Japan thinks, according to a poll, thinks they should be further postponed or simply cancelled. And this further controversy simply isn't helping the state of the games. Will they go ahead? No idea.
So far, I wouldn't say on that part. It looks like they're ahead. Mind you, of course, the big Olympic committee in that regard outside of Japan, the U.S. one, has said they have heard nothing about cancellations, nor has NBC. And for those who may not know, NBC, for the most part, is who broadcasts the game in the U.S., but also internationally is the one that owns most of the rights you see to share the Olympic Games. So it will be interesting in terms of TV coverage and footage. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that regard. As Adam mentioned, there's not a lot of popular will with these games, the Japanese public. This was more of a Shinzo Abe project to bring Japan back on the world stage, in his view. The public, of course, with the COVID thing, COVID delightment has been a little bit of an annoyance. To the question, I think there's a question about the monarchy. Adam could probably maybe fill me in on that or answer it better than I could. I think we have a question about how is the allowing willing to rule in the monarch thing going. You might be able to answer that, Adam.
I have no idea what that's referring to. So you're still listening, if you want to, I guess, reword it for my simple, tiny brain, that would be useful. But I think, is there anything else that you need to say on the topic?
Sort of on the topic, but it's a little different. It's Prime Minister Suga probably has a lot on the stake with these games, because his already internal standing in his own party room is beginning to weaken every passing day. So a well-run Olympic Games is really something he desperately needs, as he's already faced criticisms about being slow on the job, and already there are rumors reported out that the new vaccines minister, Taro Kuno, is already, being lined up by many in the LDP as the fresh face to run. Of course, some of you may not be aware, there is an election in Japan scheduled this year, and the LDP has a leadership convention scheduled right on the eve before the election season kicks off. So it is not improbable, if Suga's problems continue and the Olympics do not go ahead or do not do well for Japan, that Suga may very well be canned by his own party and replaced by a more popular option. And I think we now have the question here. So if you would like to answer it, Adam, since you are on the Asia Lex team.
Let's see.
I think he's asking about the...
Right, okay, right. No, I hadn't heard of this. Right, this is quite interesting. So I can read up on this in the future, but that is quite interesting. So just to anybody who isn't seeing, so basically, apparently, what the person in the chat is saying is that Japan was going to change the rules to let women become empress in regard to advancing women, but apparently they had a commission for this. So I can quickly check this now.
I wasn't aware of that, so thank you, Harold, for bringing that to our attention. Always good to have active listeners ask hosts questions. Never a bad idea at all. But yes, this to fill it in as Adam researches the question at hand. Yes, these Olympic Games are very important, and it's very likely that the new chief of that will be Japan, probably going for a young, I would assume, businesswoman who is younger and basically saying this is the new Japan. We're not a bunch of the classic Japan that most people assume is the older 70-year-old male who has had the connection since the day of birth. So I think this is really the Japanese government statement of this is the new Japan, of a more open, inclusive, diversified, whatever you want to use adjective next to that.
So just checking from now, from what I've can Google. I'm not seeing anything specific on it. That may just be my poor Googling skills. But I do see a few articles that say that a commission was set up. So by next week, I may definitely, and I'm able to find some more stuff on this, we can definitely cover it. Because you know what, talking about the Japanese monarchy could be an interesting thing to add. So there we are. I think from there, I will go on to our final topic of the day before we move on to everyone's favorite section. And this is some instability in Somalia. I know, quite exciting there. Oh, sorry. Actually, before we go to that, I'll just answer the person's comment in the chat, which is, why did the LDP keep going? Okay, so this is a really important thing, because Peter talks about the Prime Minister Suga having incredibly poor sort of approval. He may be kicked out of the job, and that's very true. However, the LDP, the ruling party in Japan, keep winning because, number one, the Japanese outlook to politics is very apathetic. And this exists for a number of reasons. However, there definitely just seems to be the sense that because the LDP have been ruling for so long, besides a brief intermission after the 2008 financial crisis, because they've been ruling for so long, there definitely is this thought that change can't be brought about. And so people who vote for and support the LDP go out and vote, but people who are, desire for change don't think that anything can really happen, and so they simply don't vote. And it is a significant problem in Japan. If you look at their turnouts for governor elections, if you look for any by-elections that come up, they're really, really low. And if you compare it to the rest of the world, so apathy is a major one. I'd say, another aspect to why the LDP do well is just this sense or idea that the opposition can't offer anything else. So the Constitutional Democratic Party, who is the alternative, they're the major opposition party, they are sort of stuck at the moment in an identity crisis. For a lot of young people, and especially for a lot of women in Japan, they don't find their representation in the opposition party, and they don't find it in the governing party. So they don't see any reason to vote. So again, it's going back to that apathy. So yeah, I think just the general thing is that for a lot of people, they simply don't care about politics. And that obviously is a major issue that the opposition parties have to overcome. So yeah, that's why I'd say is the main reason why they keep winning despite the approval ratings for their prime ministers being so low. But anyway, thank you for that interesting comment, because it allowed for a good tangent. But yes, as I said, so Somalia is in another crisis. So the United Nations Security Council has called upon the government of Somalia and the regional states to resume talks and agree upon the framework to hold elections as soon as possible. So the degradation of relations between Somalian leaders began after negotiations for how to proceed with an election on choosing the next government, the next president, passed a deadline without any resolution. And so the opposition stated that they would no longer recognize the authority of the president. Obviously, you have an issue there where people aren't recognizing their own government, so that's creating some issues there, and they don't want to talk to them or talk to the president because they just think he's a random person or any other citizen. So this is coupled with increasing violence by the Al-Shabaab jihadist group, and you've also got a food crisis worsened by a locust invasion. So the country is once again at a breaking point. In fact, interestingly enough, Al-Shabaab assaulted the city, which were hosting talks for this election when the president arrived to involve himself. So clearly, this hasn't helped the situation at all. So the real reason the opposition parties believed that this, the president was halting is because they thought he was trying to extend the mandate in which he was trying to keep for himself, whereas the president and those supportive of him have been blaming a few regional governments for holding up elections for not being the perfect way that they want them. So yeah, you definitely have the situation now where people are at an impasse. Interestingly enough as well, you've also got So as a part of this, so this was a part of a United Nations Security Council where they talked, where it wasn't just about calling for new elections. They also condemned al-Shabaab and the work they were doing. They commended the work of the African Union, but also for you Somaliland fans out there, because I know there are quite a few, they have also upheld the territorial integrity and political independence of Somalia, which didn't scream very well for Somaliland. So if you're interested in that break-off state and the role it has in the crisis there, they definitely haven't had any kind of significant support drawn out of this crisis. So yeah, that's really the overview of it. The hope for elections was quite significant from the UN and other interested groups, as they thought something could actually happen. But as we can see, nothing is going ahead. And with the opposition not recognizing the president and the president being very distrustful of the opposition, it doesn't seem like there's any way of really breaking out this political impasse. Peter, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I think, as Adam mentioned, it's spectacularly well what's going on. I think this is, of course, Somalia, and the word government stability is something of an oxymoron. But yeah, this is an important thing. The forcing of the Somalis to at least come to some arrangement about new elections is significant, coming from the UN, which has been criticized over the years for being a little lax on this, especially in regards to how it deals with al-Shabaab and other groups. But this is very good in terms of trying to push something in terms of getting this. The Somali government hasn't, I believe, they haven't had elections. You can answer this for me in some time, I believe. Like 4 or 7 years or something in that ballpark. I may be wrong in this regard. But yes, I think it's a good thing. The Security Council is pushing this on Somalia to hold elections. Hopefully they're free and fair elections. Somalia's track record on that when they've had that is not very great, but that's to be expected. And there's the new Somaliland fans. I actually know someone who claims descendancy from there. Fun fact. Is an interesting saga of its own right added into this, but it'll be interesting to see how that works, since New Somalia and Somalia tend to not like being put in the same sentence for numerous reasons. But it'll be interesting to see how this rolls out.
I entirely agree with every point you made there. So, yep, that was our favorite, our second favorite section, because we only have 2 sections. I really like the Africa section, where we get to talk about a bit where it only seems like Al Jazeera and France 24 talk about it, so now you're getting it from here.
And both of them have biases, but we won't go into that.
Yes, they may or may not be state-linked, and one of them is a particularly dodgy link, but anyway.
Well, yes, and the French, we all know the French history in Africa and what they like to do in that realm, but we'll keep it at that.
So yeah, we now move on to everyone's favorite section, the loser of the week.
De la semana.
Yay. Right, Peter, take it away. Who's your loser?
Wow. Oh, wow. I'm being put on the spot. Ooh, I thought Adam would put first. My loser of the week is very tough. It's a very tough category because there's always so many but I'm going to give it today. The French government spokesman who went on French national television against Marine Le Pen and said that she's moderate on Islam. That's a first. I didn't realize we'd have today that a liberal center-right government would say to the far right that it's soft on Islam. That's certainly quite a take, especially coming from Marine Le Pen. Well, going to Marine Le Pen, you could see on her face today, if you haven't, it's a fun video to watch, of just being shockingly giving this insult, in which she replied in her usual sense that she just doesn't like Islam, but she thinks they should be able to practice it. That's mostly what this gist was about, because Le Pen was saying, in her case of trying to, I believe, more or less modernize herself, that she would allow Islam to be recognized, and the French government spokesman said, you're being soft, which is a kind of a loser of the week because Macron has been pushing for secularism. So someone's going to have a very lovely chat probably tonight, French government headquarters.
Yeah, so from what I can tell out of the debate, or at least from people who speak French and were giving me some clarifications here, it seemed like what the Interior Minister, who I should mention is a hardliner, who was appointed to Macron's government to be sort of represent. He's really appealing to the right, but the intention was to show like, oh, Le Pen talks about being this anti-Islam party, etc., and yet she's failing her supporters. But it came across in such an awful and awkward way. I would 100% recommend watching the clip because, yes, as Peter mentioned, Le Pen's reaction really sort of summarized it all, and it can definitely be concluded that this definitely wasn't a win for Macron's government. And yeah. But also another interesting element to this, besides the fact that Islam is being played in this way, people's religion, obviously, it gets to a very dangerous point where people are talking outside of it as a concept. And for French Muslims, it can be an incredibly uncomfortable thing to see how the government can sort of play with it. But another thing is that because of the strategy that Macron's going to, appealing to his right, which really there's no evidence that we have for working, according to polls which show that Le Pen is closing in further, Macron is really normalizing a lot of the views that Le Pen sort of believed in that would have been unconscionable when he first got elected, and was sort of the reason why he had such strong support in the second round back when he first got elected. But now we have this situation where it's more normal. It's going to be something that Macron, plays to. So, it seems like the political climate in France is going further to the right by the day.
Wait, and to the point about the interior minister, just because it was Adam was mentioning him, Gerard Darmanin, who is the man in question, he's very much a righty, as mentioned, very close to the former Sarkozy wing of the Les Républicains. As you mentioned, as known, that l'ORM has become very much a home for ex-dissidents of Les Républicains. This Darmanin has spoken against same-sex marriage, against gender studies, identity politics, and also COVID restrictions as well. So very much a chap in terms of what he believes in. And as mentioned now, he won on this thing, trying to basically attack Le Pen for being all talk but no action because of her roles she has. And obviously, as of today, he's now ended up in the gaffe machine to making himself look like a moderate to Marie Le Pen. What a day.
Yep, indeed. So, I mean, just to say something rather embarrassingly, that was my loser of the week. We should probably check these before we go into.
Yeah, we should probably do that as an editorial time.
Yeah, that seems like a smart thing. You know what? Another idea that I had, and I sort of touched upon this when we were talking about Italy, but I really think Salvini or Matteo Salvini is sort of the loser of the week this time. Primarily because not only did he sort of have to play to something that he doesn't believe in, and it can come across as really disingenuous. I don't know. I'm really stretching the definition of what a loser is here. But in the sense that he is the leader of the Italian right, I'm really going to say he's the loser of the week because he lost that position. He's no longer the loser of the week this time round because he ultimately has lost that sort of significant status.
Yeah, I mean, him talking like a Europhile this week was certainly a surprise to many of us who follow Italian politics a little bit. Him talking, how we wanted the children of Italy to lead Europe's future, which sounds very surprising from someone that is Matteo Salvini. But maybe the business wing up in northern Italy advised him of that after a nice, chat meal.
Yeah. So I think that's all. It's been a week of the right-wing populists being loser of the week. Or I say right-wing populists, it was the Macron government being the losers there, playing off of a right-wing populist.
On a quick note about the thing you mentioned about them pulling to the right, the irony is, from all the polling, they're getting almost all the Les Républicains voters. Those of them are heading their way. That's not where their problems lie. It's actually more with leftist kind of voters is where they can't get that final push. They're winning a lot of the Les Républicains voters from that. So it's just quite interesting to see this when they're already kind of the natural home of a lot of Les Républicains voters for the second option.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately it's quite a compromising state because there are a lot of centre-left to left-wing voters who would vote for Macron out of the sense that he's better than Le Pen, but they just may not turn up in the second round, which is a strong possibility, and that can compromise Macron.
Yeah, because look, digging in, as you mentioned, Macron's winning the center-right vote. That's not his problem at all. I mean, for most polls, when they start asking about the runoffs, 80 to 90% of Les Républicains voters go his way, which is pretty unheard of for a guy who is in a third different party. But that's not his problem. It's other issues, and be interesting to see if he does counter something in this regard, since LREM has become increasingly more of a center-right, if not right of center party, which for a lot of the people who were ex-French socialists who voted for LREM probably has to be a disappointment.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, what an interesting week it's been. Probably not as interesting as last week, which I got to miss out on. I didn't get to talk about the coup, which, I didn't get to talk about a coup. How sad is that? But what can you do?
Lib Dems must suffer as a result of this. I'm joking.
Every week, never ends.
I mean, it's the Lib Dems. They're everyone's favorite punchline for every day of the week.
Well, so we got a +2 polling result in Salvation this week.
Yes, 9%, and the boundaries would still massacre you on that.
Oh, well, what can we do?
And yes, before I go, I saw a comment. Yes, she is a weak campaigner, and that is very much a thing. She is not very charismatic, so it'd be interesting to see if that problems do come up again in the second, because she's obviously under much more of a microscope than she was last time, because she's much closer to 50+1. So it'll be interesting. And yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see what her party's evaluation is, because their label is far right, but then their economic package is much more, how shall we say it, bit to the left, what you would expect in that regard. So it'll be interesting to see that to be attacked on, because that's, as I mentioned, the Les Républicains voters, a lot of them don't like Le Pen because of the economics package is many things what they don't like in general. But also, before we go, Elections Daily is having a fundraiser for a redistricting map that involves every scenario humanly possible in every 50 states and the United States. This fundraiser is already over $1,000. I believe they're fundraising what they need is $1,600. So if you are listening in and you like our site and you like what we provide, please chip in and donate. And it's on our Twitter handle at Elections Daily. You can go there, and the link is there, and you can donate and help us get that part. But yes, thank you as always for all those who watch the show, and thank you to Harold for being a great, audience member and asking us questions and putting us on our feet.
We do love a good question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also because I saw last comment, yes, PIS in Poland is incredibly weak, and ironically, their polling numbers are taking a dump in recent weeks because of that 2050 coalition that was made up by, I can't remember his name now.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to ask what they stand for, that itself is a question.
It's a meme.
That's definitely there.
Because doesn't it have like a left-wing element, a right-wing element, and like an ecological element or something like that?
Yeah, it seems like sort of centrist environmentalist is the best way I've seen it put. But yeah, I think that's its own conversation when Poland eventually goes to an election. Because here's the thing: they may not be around when it actually gets there. I think the next election is 2023 or something like that.
Yeah.
So we are far, far away. Third parties have risen and fall. It's sort of like Israel in a similar sense. But yeah.
To Harold's question, what it is, it's basically, it's going to be, from what my understanding is, I'm not on that, the higher ups as they are, but from my understanding of how this is working is basically, they would pay to basically play with an algorithm with DRA, I'm assuming, to map out every scenario humanly possible for anyone to use, basically on a database that would be provided by the site to use. So that's my understanding. Again, I'm not on the higher ups. I'm in the international section with Adams. So That's what I understand of it, but it's a great project. And if anyone's listening, I hope you donate. And on that note, hope you follow us on Twitter for our updates, and listen to us on Spotify or whatever podcast service you get. And I'll leave Adam to close out the show with our favorite line. Have a good see you. Have a safe week. My usual spiel.
Yeah, do that. I didn't know. Oh, damn. You didn't put this in the script. Oh, okay.
I was gonna let you have your moment of glory. I usually
Right,
never.
everyone. I hope you have a good week. I hope you follow some polls. Make sure you watch those polls closely so you can comment in our chat and talk about how the polls are showing at one thing. And I hope you have a safe week as well.
And see you next Friday.
Yeah. Bye.